Well, a world without effective antibiotics where people die from simple infections seems unimaginable. But infectious disease specialists at a conference in Sydney have warned that's exactly what will happen unless governments around the world unite to halt a growing problem. They say antibiotics continue to be overprescribed, and as a result, superbugs are already emerging that are resistant to even the most powerful antibiotics. Connor Duffy reports.
It's been exactly 2 years since my leg got amputated. It's been a 1.5 year process to walking the way I do now and being able to do the things that I do.
Gregor Gniewosz lost his left leg after what was supposed to be a routine treatment for a foot ulcer at Sydney's Liverpool Hospital. It was there that he picked up the antibiotic-resistant superbug called MRSA, and at just 31, he was given the devastating news that he required an amputation.
It was me that requested the 4 opinions, only because, you get one opinion saying you're going to have to get amputated. There has to be another alternative out there. And unfortunately, they all came back and said exactly the same thing. No alternative but to amputate the leg below the knee, because the MRSA had actually got into the bone.
It could even lead to death or severe consequences. And we're facing, I think, now a real threat, global threat.
Doctors from around the world who have gathered to discuss the problem in Sydney are warning that cases like Gregor Gniewosz's are becoming more common and that the world faces a looming public health disaster. Swedish infectious disease specialist Professor Otto is a leading authority and activist on antibiotic-resistant bugs like MRSA.
We have been using antibiotics for 70 years. We've been misusing them, and there are very few or even no real good antibiotics in the pipeline.
We are seeing people come in to hospital with severe, life-threatening bacterial infections that we're having now to use the antibiotics of last resort for. And if those germs become resistant to those antibiotics in the future, there won't be anything left to use.
About 1/3 of all people who die between the ages of 20 and 40 in Australia die from TB.
The mass production of antibiotics in the 1940s transformed modern medicine and virtually wiped out diseases like tuberculosis in Australia. But infectious disease specialists believe reliance on the miracle drug led to massive overprescribing, and today bacteria such as MRSA have mutated and are now resistant to many antibiotics.
That's the message we have to get across, that we have to be much more certain about our use of antibiotics, otherwise we'll lose them.
Much of the things that we can do in modern medicine, like cancer treatment, transplantations, major surgery, neonatal infections, all of this really depends on effective antibiotics.
Well, there's a tradition, isn't there, of when you go along to the local doctor with a cold, often viral, that you expect an antibiotic. And I think part of this is public perception of what's required to treat infection.
Antibiotics are used widely in agriculture, including on chickens, pigs and even salmon. Microbiologists are convinced that agriculture's addiction to using tons of antibiotics every year is also contributing to resistance.
Antibiotics are used not to treat individual animals, but to be used as growth promoters or in feeds. And the way I think about it in that setting is when you think of some of the really stupid ideas through the history of mankind, giving antibiotics into feedlots is one of them.
In India, where antibiotics are available over the counter, the most resistant superbug yet, NDM1, was identified in 2008. There have been at least 3 cases of NDM1 in Australia, and India's popularity as a destination for travellers seeking cheap operations has medical specialists worried infections will increase right across the globe.
Well, we're talking about the pre-antibiotic era coming to us, and I think in some countries, even in Europe, but primarily I think in the developing world, the pre-antibiotic era has come, because there are infections that are totally resistant now, and there are no options. So we're really facing a very serious threat here.
There's a huge sense of frustration at this conference that the problem isn't receiving more attention. The doctors say governments around the world need to act now.
Do you feel like at all like you're ringing a warning bell that very few people are listening to?
Yes, absolutely.
Part of the problem is that there have been too little data on this to convince policymakers, governments and others that this is a real threat. But such data are now emerging. And from Europe we have a recent study that tells us that 25,000 people in the EU die yearly because of the antibiotics doesn't work because of resistance.
The Australian Commission on Safety and Quality has developed new guidelines, new ways to deal with these problems in hospitals and in primary practice, and they're being implemented. So I think we're doing a lot. I think we can always do more and tighten up and make the public even more aware.
Back in Canberra, Gregor Gniewosz doesn't need convincing of the dangers. He's facing the reality of a life of disability and is warning that others could face the same fate.
Most human nature is like, it'll never happen to me or anything, but it will happen, or it can happen.